riled up, you're gonna love Bahubali. Like, it is.
Really?
It's epic, dude. It's crazy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it has. I felt similarly at the end of the first movie. Like, I knew that there was a second one, but the first one feels so whole as well.
Oh.
Like,
Wow.
it's a very similar relationship. Like, you feel like you've watched this entire epic and this legend of Bahubali, and then you find out that you've just wrapped up the first part. I mean, it's very similar in that way. And at the same time, the second one is like a completely different, but exactly the same type of experience. Like, the second movie is a whole movie. It's not like you're watching Infinity War and Endgame, where it's
interesting.
Like, you've seen two full, complete movies still with those moments, cliffhanger or whatever you want to call it. And yeah, and even with like a Deathly Hallows, like the DNA of Deathly Hallows Part 1, it's moody. It's a road trip. It's not like Bahubali Part 1 has to be a different thing because it's a Part 1. They are both equally massive epics. It's pretty special, actually. So I'll just hype that up for you. But very similar relationship.
So I'll ask you regarding this film. When we figured out, so neither of us knew going into this movie that this was a Part 1. I think it was hinted at in one of the videos, the prelude or the world, but I thought it was hinted at as more of, oh, this is something that more could come from this because there's such expansive lore here. No, it's a Part 1. It's a legit Part 1 because the story is not finished. Did you feel fully satisfied with the story that we got, or did the cliffhanger bother you, rile you up to the point to where, I wish it wouldn't have been that, big of a cutoff like it was? How'd you feel?
No, that's sort of the point I was making with, like, remove my Avengers comparison. So if we're just talking about Deathly Hallows Part 1 and 2, it's not like that at all. At the end of Deathly Hallows Part 1, even going into that, just because it's also based on books, like, you walk into that knowing there's a Part 2, and so you kind of forgive it, but it's like
Hunger Games type thing.
Yeah, no, it is not that experience because of how we've already spoken about how sort of Indian cinema works in these ways, but the fact that the first act said everything and gave us the lay of the land, moved the pieces properly so well, we had time to learn everybody's motivations and invest in everyone. It's not like we invested in one person. We already spoke to that. We invested in everybody's mission, and that's why we had all these stirred emotions in the final battle. We saw a complete movie here that also teased the next installment. And both are rarely true, but this time it is true, and it's perfectly okay.
I guess I would say I would compare this more to a Beyond the or an Across the Spider-Verse as opposed to some of the other movies that you mentioned, because that was very similar, right? It's a complete experience with a very clear tease and a very clear cliffhanger for something more to come. Maybe a little dead reckoning in there as well. I mean, that was such a complete experience. They no longer even call it Part 1. And so I guess that was they dropped that from the title. So I guess that was kind of a complete experience as well. But I feel the same way about this film. I felt very satisfied. Obviously, I'm looking forward to Part 2. And there is a massive cliffhanger at the end of this movie to where you are just left like, okay, so we're going to pick right up in the next film. But it is a complete experience because there are a lot of things that they're building up to that you get maybe not a resolution for, but you get a culmination of emotions for, where you feel some sense of a payoff, and you get that epic moment at the end with those two colliding. And I guess one of our few evil villains there that met his, died at the end there. And so that's satisfying as well because he was a pretty evil dude. And then that one little tease at the end with our big Harkonnen, Snoke type character, which just set us up for something so freaking cool. I felt very satisfied by the end of this movie. And I walked out not angry that there's a part 2, but more excited to see when that's coming and to hear announcements for
it. Admittedly, I think that maybe not all, but I think a lot of it has to do with the fact where we were when we walked into the theater to begin with, and everything that we spoke about at the beginning of this podcast. The fact that we're going in, have no idea what to expect. We're just excited to be a part of this thing or whatever. The teaser just gave that to us again. Like, that tethers you and I to our first ever Indian franchise in real time. Like, that was an invite. Ryan and Austin, stay with us, be a part of this. And I don't know how we could be dissatisfied with that. Like, there's so many more layers to it that have us, like I said, tethered to Tollywood, this franchise, whatever you want to say.